It's time to head out on the front porch on KFRM. Grab your favorite drink, sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation on the front porch.
Hi, this is Kyle Bauer. I'm your host today on the Front Porch, and it's my pleasure to have Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab with me today. We're going to learn a little bit more about the person, Scott Schwab, and about the department or the agency of Kansas Secretary of State. Let's just start with that, Secretary. Is it an agency or a department?
We consider it an agency.
Okay, and so let's talk about your history as far as how you end up as Kansas Secretary of State. The first I knew you or knew of you was when you were a legislator from the Kansas City area. So can we just fill folks in on how you get to that spot?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. A lot of folks call me a native Kansan, which I wish I was. I wasn't born in Kansas, but I got here as quick as I could. I was actually born in Detroit because my dad dropped out of high school during the Vietnam era and ended up going to Florida in the Navy and joining the Navy. And after he got out, he then got his GED and eventually got his diploma degree in business administration. So he didn't want to work in the factory anymore. He didn't want his kids growing up in Detroit. And I was one of 4 kids. I was the youngest. So we moved to Emporia, Kansas, and he got a job with Hopkins Manufacturing. And just kind of an odd side note, my neighbor 2 doors down was Lorna Anderson. And if anybody's seen the movie Murder Ordained, they will know that movie, it takes place in Emporia, Kansas. And my sister used to babysit her twins.
That's amazing.
My dad eventually got crosswise with Mr. Hopkins and got a job at Fuller Brush in Great Bend. And I think we arrived in Great Bend right around when I was in the 4th grade. And I consider Great Bend home. I always have. I grew up there, graduated high school there. When I came home from college, I went there. And I really enjoyed it, even though after I graduated high school, my folks moved closer to Larned because by then my dad was working for the state hospital there in Larned. I just still consider Great Bend home. And though, they had the Vietnam Wall Memorial, the mobile one in Great Bend, got to go back and speak. And it was just good to be home, see some old classmates and friends. But, yeah, I grew up in Great Bend, graduated. My mom said, you're going to go to Fort Hays State because it's close and affordable, even though I had to pay for it. And went to Fort Hays, got a degree in communication, and ran for student senate, enjoyed it. Student body president, got my can kicked. But I was like, there's nobody. It was 1994, and nobody was running for the legislature.
Well, that's kind of, to be honest, this whole story is news to me. I had no idea of your ties to Central Kansas, and certainly Great Bend is Central Kansas.
You can't get more center than Great Bend, Kansas. I've worked in L.A., San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Florida, and everybody says, where are you from? I'll say, I'm from Great Bend, Kansas. And they're like, where's that? I said, put your finger in the middle of the country, lift up your finger, you'll see a town called Great Bend.
So when you graduated from Fort Hays, then you obviously took a job that made you travel.
Eventually I did. So what happened was I ran for the legislature in Hays and lost. It was 94. I just felt like, I'm a Republican. I want a Republican candidate to challenge. And I lost, but I had a good job with Kansas Farm Bureau. Eventually, Farm Bureau gave me an opportunity to transfer to the Kansas City area, a bigger market to sell insurance. And I met this wonderful, well-churched girl in Shawnee, Kansas. She lived in Olathe, and I wasn't going to let her date anybody else but me, so we got married. And I put her through pharmacy school at the University of Kansas. And so while putting her through, I ended up getting a job in healthcare sales, and that's what caused me to do a lot of travel. I was on the road 3 to 4 days a week for almost 10 years.
I had no idea. That's really a very fascinating story. And your wife, though, but you continued to live then in Kansas City because both of you had a profession that was the center at that point.
Yeah, and she grew up in Olathe, and her mom was in Olathe, and, it's kind of hard to take a daughter away from her mama,
Sure.
and I had no plan to do that. So we stayed in Olathe, and once she got done with college, she goes, what do you want to do? You put me through school for the past 4 or 5 years. What do you want to do? And I thought, well, I want to either go to law school or run for office. She goes, well, go take your LSAT, get ready to go to law school. Well, then we find out it's a redistricting year in 2000, so there's a new district that I'm living in 2001, so I decide to run, and I win. And she says, well, if you end up not running again or losing someday in the future, then you can go to law school. And that was 20 years ago, 4 kids ago. I'm not going to go back to law school. I could say I took my LSAT, and that is all I did at law school.
So after you became a legislator, then were you able to continue then in your profession, or did you have to change professions?
I kept the profession, but I did jump from company to company from time to time because often they wanted me to be promoted to sales manager, which would require me to move or leave the legislature, and I didn't want to do that because I really enjoyed it. And we also, I went to every company I worked for and said, if I can do a year's worth of sales in 9 months, can I continue to do this? And they said, the one time you don't, you're done. Well, I always did. I always hit my head or surpassed my projections that they had for me and ended up just having a very successful sales career. And I really enjoyed it. It got to be, I felt like sometimes I was just a professional visitor, but yet the numbers kept going up. But I just enjoyed going around the country meeting people. And the one thing I love about Kansas, I don't care where you're at. They may make fun of you a little bit because, oh, Kansas, Dorothy, Toto, blah, blah, blah. But you say, I'm just from Kansas, and if they get into a political conversation, I don't know, I'm just from Kansas. And people are so nice to people from Kansas because we're humble and we're kind and we work hard. You go to the East Coast, they work hard, but they're not always kind. You go to the West Coast, they're kind, but they don't always work hard. Kansas, man, we work hard and we're nice to people. We have a genuine love for people. And I always ran into folks that either went to KU, K-State, or somehow had a Kansas connection.
So help me with the timeline then. The first time you were elected to the legislature was what year?
That was in 2002, and so I got sworn in 2003, served 2 terms, and then I did I'm going to run for Congress project in 2006. That was an expensive freight train I got ran over. I had my second child was born. He was only a couple months old when I announced I was running. It probably wasn't the wisest thing, but I was pretty ambitious and arrogant back then. You could have asked me. I would have told you I was the smartest person in the room. I had no problem letting people know that. We had to look at our former selves and realize how much growing up we had to do. But,
well, you know what though? I'm sorry. I'm going to defend you a little bit. I knew you in those days from times that I had been at the legislature. You were a rising star, and you were and still are a very sharp person. And there was a lot of people that liked dealing with you because you understood complicated issues and you were a nice person as well.
Well, that's really, really kind. I'm not going to argue with that because I just thank you. That's a very kind compliment. But there's some parts of me that just thought I should be president of the United States by now. And I didn't appreciate the moment I was in while I was in the moment. And after I lost that run for Congress, I was like, I had so much I could do, so much influence. And the best part of it is the people you can help. So many folks struggle with the bureaucracy of state government. And I was in a position where I could say, hey, I'll just pick up the phone, I'll call the Department of Labor, or I'll call the Board of Nursing or Accounting and help you get your permit, or the real estate board and help you get your permit, because sometimes things get lost. And as a legislator, I could do that. Once I wasn't a legislator, I couldn't help people like that. And that's probably the most rewarding portion of being in the legislature is you actually can genuinely pick up the phone and help someone cut through the bureaucracy of government and get them the things that they deserve.
So help me just a little bit, your general area that you represented. I mean, North Kansas City, South, East, West.
Yeah, I was Olathe. So in Johnson County, Olathe is the county seat of Johnson County. And I kind of had the Mid-America Nazarene University area. And it's kind of different because out like in Great Bend, you might have 4 legislators that touch the county, but they cover multiple counties often, especially the further west you get out to like Sharon Springs. But in Johnson County, my district was 3 miles wide and 2 miles high. It was pretty compact. Now, that's a lot of doors to go door to door on, but you're not driving from farm to farm. You're just going in and out of cul-de-sacs. So to get elected that first time, I knocked on over 2,000 doors.
I'm sure. I mean, that's the only way. You can't afford media in a market like that. There's too much spill. So did you go back to the legislature then after 2006?
Yeah, so what happened was the person who replaced me in the legislature didn't finish his term. And so I was the only one that, by acclamation, I got appointed by the Republican committee in that district to appoint me back by the precinct committee men and women to go back to the seat in 2007, at the end of 2007. So I was a state representative again, skated into election, and stayed there until through 2018 before I got elected Secretary of State.
We're visiting today with the current Secretary of State, Scott Schwab. We're finding out about him personally, and we're going to find out about the office in a little bit as well. Join us after the break for more on the Front Porch. Hi, this is Kyle Bauer. Welcome back to the second segment of On the Front Porch, visiting with a Central Kansas native, which I'm sorry, but that was new to me, Scott Schwab. He's Kansas Secretary of State. Before we went to the break, we talked about how he got to the point that he was elected to Kansas Secretary of State. Secretary Schwab, so let's talk just a little bit about being elected Secretary of State. First of all, who was the Secretary of State prior to your election?
Yeah, so in 2018, Chris Kobach announced he was running for governor. So through prayer and a lot of, we had lost the son 2 years previous, so it took a while for us to really process if this was something we wanted to do. And when I first got elected, Doug Mays was the speaker, and he said, if you're in this House chamber and you look at the ceiling and you're no longer in awe of these paintings, your time in this chamber is done. That's your term limit. And I remember in 2017, it was a long, bloody session, and I just looked at the season. I was Speaker Pro Tem at the time and thought, I just don't care. And then I knew it's either run for something else or be done. And I knew we haven't had a legislator that became a Secretary of State in over 50 years. And so a lot of times the legislature makes policy, but the administrator really doesn't understand what the legislature was trying to do. I was the chair of ethics and elections at the time for several years when a lot of policy changes were made. So it's like, I know what the legislative intent was. I think I could be Secretary of State and help run this agency very efficiently. And so wife agreed, and we've really enjoyed this new season as being Secretary of State.
I think a lot of people, though, don't understand what the Secretary of State does. I mean, it's a bit, I guess I'll say, paperwork, mundane, keeping track of things, keeping track of different corporations, different businesses, and then, that small mundane thing of running elections. That, I think the office is much more complicated than people understand.
It is, and it's a fun agency because we're not intense, except for during certain election years. It gets a little bit intense in there, and obviously after the 2020 election, we were dealing a lot with rumors and false allegations. But we're a filing office. We don't make any policy. We just basically do what the legislature tells us to. If you think about it, when Kansas was first formed, you had the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, treasurer, and then, of course, the secretary of state. And literally, you were just a secretary for the state of Kansas. Well, what happens eventually as the economy grows and governments grow, you need a secretary just for the Department of Agriculture. You need a secretary just for revenue. You need a secretary just for labor. And so a lot of those jobs got parceled out to the governor's cabinet, and eventually I get whatever's left stays with our agency. So we handle, like you said, we're the head election officer for the state. The biggest portion of what we do in our office is business filings. If you have LLCs or if you incorporate, or even if you're a 501c3, sometimes you just got to file with the state. And some folks that don't own a business wonder, well, why do you got to file with the state? It protects you from somebody stealing your brand. If you come up with Kyle Bauer's Radiator Shop and you get 19 locations across the state, you don't want somebody else coming in and calling themselves Kyle Bauer's Radiator Shop and taking your business because they're confused of confusing customers with who they are. And so it just protects you. It also protects, our financial institutions for small business loans to make sure you're actual business and it's not fraud. And then we also do documents, the statutes annotated. We publish the statutes with the Kansas Register. A lot of laws and rules and regs become effective when they're published in the weekly register, which we normally publish on Thursdays. Okay, like during COVID, we were doing a lot of emergency printing of those simply because their orders were coming through our agency pretty quick. But we're literally a secretary for the state of Kansas. So a lot of folks don't know who I am. They don't know what the office does, which is kind of the way we like it. We don't want to be so intrusive into people's lives or so frustrating to deal with that they know everything about us because they're angry with the way we administrate the office. It's like some of my staff likes to say, we want to be actively boring. We don't want to do anything. I don't want to be on Fox News talking about what we do. I just want to do it, if that makes any sense.
I hope this is a fair question, and I promise you we won't audit. About how many people work in the Office of Secretary of State?
Yeah, we fluctuate between about 37 and 42. I think we have 2 open positions right now, and then we also normally have like 1 or 2 interns. A lot of folks think we have 60 or 100 employees, but really we're a pretty small agency, and we run very efficiently.
I'll be honest with you. I have a number of business entities, and I find it very easy, or basically just not any pain at all when I'm having to deal with you. And I would say that in general, people get so they are more and more, the first thing they do when they do business with somebody, especially from out of state or someone they don't know, is just go to your webpage and just document that, hey, this is a real company, and yes, the address I was given is that address, and it puts a lot of comfort in place in a hurry.
And it creates a lot of protections. I have an LLC, and because I invest in various small businesses around, and I want that LLC to protect our family's assets. And it was kind of funny to get a letter from myself to myself, thanking myself for filing with an LLC in my own office.
I hope you keep those. You should keep those.
Interesting. I got a lot of friends, like I play Sunday softball, and they take a picture like, why am I sending you a check again? But I'm glad to hear you say it's easy. We're working on making it easier. We're coming off our old computer system onto a new, more modern, efficient system. And hopefully by next January, the plan is instead of filing every year, you'll file for 2 years. So that's less administration on you and your businesses. And that helps our folks that do a lot of investment in Kansas that have sometimes up to 60, 100-plus LLCs because they're doing so many different transactions and businesses to file that every other year instead of once a year. It's just little things like that that we can do to just make it easier to do business in Kansas. During the shutdown, we were doing about 80 new business filings a day still.
Wow.
And so that's kind of the low watermark. We normally do about 80 to 90 a day. We've been up as high as 130 plus a day.
Wow.
And that's simply because a lot of folks who lost their job during the pandemic didn't go back to work for a company. They created their own company. And so anything we can do to make that easier, because one of these days, one of these companies could be the next Cerner. They could be the next Raytheon. They could be the next Fuller Brush. We don't know. And so we just want to make sure that they're not running into any unnecessary thresholds.
It wasn't that long ago that there was what I'll call a business tax that we paid to the Secretary of State's office. I believe it was 1% of our assets, I think. It's been probably more than 10 years ago. But for those who don't know, now the fee is a mere $55. Does that truly cover the costs of running your department?
Well, that's a portion of it. They got rid of the franchise tax. I was actually on tax committee when we did that. That was a bloody battle, but yeah, Kathleen Sebelius ended up signing it. But they got rid of that, but we also have fees for like mergers and acquisitions, and then we also have fees for the printing and for our books and things like that. So we're completely fee funded. The only time we get tax revenue, is if the feds do like a Help America Vote Act and send money to our office to help with elections. Then there's a state match, which the federal government requires a match if they're going to receive that money. So we go to the legislature and say, hey, we don't want to take it from our fee fund because we're running efficiently, but we don't have tons of margin. And we want an actual in budget in the statute that we can go back to the feds if they ever say we didn't do a match. We'd say, right, it's right there in the law that the legislature gave us our match. So that's really the only time we take tax dollars. A lot of folks who've been Secretary of State in the past and say, hey, I cut the budget by this. Well, what's the point of cutting the budget if you're not cutting the revenue that comes in? And so it's kind of hard for us to cut fees, but we haven't raised them, anything significantly. And then we just run on that. And then if we were to cut fees, we'd use it in a way to adjust. If we save money in our agency, we would adjust the fee to save it on those who use it. Because the Supreme Court's been clear. A fee is what you use for a service. Like I pay a fee, I get a driver's license. You pay a fee, you have an LLC that's filed with our office. I shouldn't have to charge more than that so I can run the elections division or other things.
Well, and that's a great segue into our next segment of On the Front Porch. We're going to be talking about how the Kansas Secretary of State works with the local county clerks and runs our elections. You're listening to Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab. Join us after the break, after the top of the hour, for more On the Front Porch. Welcome back to On the Front Porch. My guest today is Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab. We've been talking about all of the different things that his office does except elections. Now we're going to delve into elections and I think the complicated nature of elections, of the different times they are, and then how the Kansas Secretary of State works with the local clerks, and how all of that group protects the integrity of elections. With that said, I guess we'll start out with, how do you interface with the local county clerks? Because they're the ones in charge of the local elections?
Yeah, so it depends partially on the election that's occurring at the time. So if it's like just a mail ballot school bond issue, all we do is we answer their questions. If you got a clerk that has a complication or something, that administrative error, we help them correct those things. If it's a local election like we're having this August, and remember there is an election this August, there is an election this November for school boards and municipalities. We just help answer questions. We don't certify that. We're not subject to getting sued if something goes wrong in one of those jurisdictions. We really engage more on those even year elections. 2024, obviously, presidential election will be big for us. And then 2026, there'll be a congressional and a governor's race coming up. So on those local elections, we just answer the phone or the email and just give them a response so they know how to administer. And right now, we do a lot of that, a significant amount, because we've had so much turnover in our core of county clerks. And these, except for 4 counties, the county clerk is not only the clerk for elections, they're also the clerk for the county commission, and they handle a lot of the books for the county. So they work a lot. They're the ones who give out those tax notices. So during November of a major election year, they're not only trying to execute on an election, they got to get these property tax notices out. So a lot of our clerks, a lot of them have a staff of 2 or 3 or less, but man, they work hard and they do it because they love it. And when folks attack the election system and the integrity of the election system, they think they're attacking me, but they're not. They're attacking that local clerk. And we work by giving them guidance, and we set the guidelines on how the election should be run. And then in those even years, I'm on the state board of canvassers along with the governor and the attorney general. We actually certify the election, which at that point you say the election is over.
So who does actually supervise the county clerk in those years when it's not a statewide election, if you will? Who do they answer to, or who do they have to be responsible to?
Well, first and foremost, they answer to the people in the county, as those clerks are elected by the folks in the county. Second, they answer to the county commission. So if they're doing something nefarious or inappropriate or just sloppy, the county commission holds them accountable. And we've had situations in the past where clerks have made so many mistakes that, the county commission has had to hold them accountable and ask them to resign, and we had to appoint a new one. Or we don't appoint it, but the Republican or Democrat, whether or not they were Democrat or Republican previous, appoints who's going to finish that term, and then someone will run for elect. But at the end of the day, really, or the end of the election, it's always the people of Kansas who hold them accountable. And so many people, they criticize our election system because they listen to a YouTube video that wasn't even produced about Kansas or in Kansas, or it's from somebody outside of Kansas that think they know Kansas. And I ask all those folks who are worried about elections in Kansas, go be a poll worker. Go work the polls and see how it's done. You'll see how complex it is and how secure it is, and you'll meet some of the most wonderful people in our state. You can be as young as 16 to be a poll worker.
Really? I didn't know that. So, but that, I think, is part of the criticism that people are having recently, is that that system was really set up for check and double check, if you will, that, as I recall it, where I used to vote in Morganville, we had a Republican and a Democrat sitting side by side checking that you were on the voter roll. And then the counting group had equal number of Republicans and Democrats counting the ballots. And of course, they were all neighbors, but it was really set up so there wouldn't be any chance of someone stuffing the ballot box. And now with electronic voting, and like for myself now, I almost always pre-vote at the courthouse, and when I get done, I slip my ballot into a little machine that I guess counts it. I never see it again after that, but I think that's where a lot of people are uncomfortable with is, how are we all assured that machine is counting correctly?
Well, so that's a great question, and we audit that. So before an election, we do what's called logic and accuracy testing, and that's an open meeting. The local election official must notify the chairs of the 3 parties that are recognized in Kansas, which are Republican, Democrat, and Libertarian. And then that chair is to let their folks know, hey, if you want to see this, and they show how they'll explain to you how you can see that the equipment's accurate. And then after the election, we pick our office picks a random race in every county, and the county picks a random precinct, and they do a hand count of that precinct to make sure it matches exactly what the machine tabulator said. And it's not just like, you used to play war and you mix a red deck of cards with a blue deck of cards. It's not, and you separate them. It's not like that. The clerk picks 3 people randomly of at least 2 different parties from the community. They come in, and the clerk holds up a ballot and says, do we all agree with what this ballot says? Yes? Okay, there's one. And they do every ballot in that precinct to make sure it matches with the tabulator. If that doesn't match, then they do another one. If that doesn't match, then they got to do a hand recount of the entire county that way, and that's called a failure. We've done over 3,000 of those, and we've only had one county with a failure because they had a programming error, and they were able to correct it and were able to certify an election just by doing it by a hand count, and it's necessary sometimes. Obviously, with the constitutional amendment we had on the ballot last year, we had over 60% of the ballots cast in Kansas hand counted. And it didn't change a thing. Not a single race was flipped because of those hand counts. One gentleman who actually just passed a couple weeks ago put $120,000 on a personal credit card, I think it was, to count several counties on the value of them both amendment, and not a single county switched.
So did I understand this correctly, that every county does that in every election? I mean, does a sample random count in every election?
All 105, they have to do what's called a post-election audit. We pick the race, they pick the precinct, and it's got to match what that tabulator said. And except for one time, they've always zeroed out perfectly.
That's amazing. I don't think very many people know that. I don't know why that is such a well-kept secret. Maybe I'm just ignorant, but I think there's probably a lot of other ignorant people out there too.
Yeah, we've been preaching it. As a matter of fact, Keith Esau, who's a state representative at the time, also out of Olathe, he proposed it, and I wasn't a big fan of it when I was in the legislature, but after coming through the 2020 elections, I really appreciate the law because it gives us that steel spine to say, hey, look, whatever issues you have with another state, they are not here because this is the way we do it. In a lot of states, they do their post-election audit after they've been certified. We do ours before the county board of canvassers meet. So it's even more important that we do even more than what most states do. And so, many folks, like they're worried about stuffing the ballot box or how do I know that machine's changing my ballot? Well, every time you vote on a machine, it gives you we call it paper ballot voter verification. It gives you a paper ballot, and that is what's counted as that sheet of paper. And we can go back and audit those, and they keep those ballots, I think, for up to 24 months, if I remember right. And so before they're destroyed. So if there's ever a question of something nefarious, those ballots, you can go back and just hand count every one of them. And the machines print ballots better than people who just use it on a piece of paper and mark it with a pen, because sometimes there's an errant mark on if you just use a pen, and then that person counting the ballot doesn't know what their intent was. Whereas with the voter machine, if someone marks it with a pen, it's irrelevant because the machine actually burns a mark into the paper. And so it's a lot more secure. And I know there's been some folks attacking them. There's a lot of attacks on Dominion, but I think Fox has now even admitted they weren't true and cost them $750 million to admit it. But we have 12 counties or 11 counties that are on Dominion. Others are on ES&S, and some are on different voting systems, just according to what the county can afford and manage. And I love that because if the entire state was on one system, you only have one system to cheat. But because there's so many different systems that clerks can use to do an election, you got 105 counties with different systems. It's so difficult to cheat.
That's a great place to stop this segment of On the Front Porch. That is Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab. We're going to be talking about, after the break, about how they work with candidates and keep you informed as a voter about the candidates. Join us after the break for more On the Front Porch. Welcome back to the fourth and final segment of On the Front Porch. I have Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab, And we have been talking elections. Well, now I'd like to talk about the candidates. Some people are not aware of just how much reporting candidates have to do and the registration they have to do with you as the Secretary of State. Can you kind of give us an overview of what they have to do and the intent of doing that is?
Yeah, so the first thing you would do, and it depends on the position you're running for. A lot of these school board races, for example, you don't have to do an ethics report with the Kansas Ethics Commission. And the Ethics Commission is a separate agency from our office. And a lot of individuals often think that we're the same because you file those reports through our office. But Ethics Commission is actually the one that has the authority over those. And I do have an appointment on the commission, but they work as an independent body, which is what you want, because I don't want to, say, hey, if you're going to investigate me, you're going to lose your job. That's what we're trying to prevent. But you would file your ethics form. You can do it either online through the ethics through us, and then you'll have to do reports, scheduled reports. And ethics always sends a letter saying you have your receipts and your expenditures. You have to post it to us by such and such a day, and it's really not that difficult. Most candidates that run for legislature or higher seats, they have an accountant do it for them. And with today's electronic banking, it's a lot easier to run statements because most people do not keep a ledger in their checkbook anymore. They do everything online or in spreadsheet anyway. So it's a lot easier to do those reports. The other thing is you got to file for office, and there's two ways to do that. You can get a percentage of signatures of the people that registered voters that reside in that district, or you can just pay a fee, and the fee's graduated according to how big the office is, whether that's the state house, state senate, or a statewide like myself, or U.S. or Congress. And now we're going to have a presidential preference primary next year, and that one I think is costing the candidates $10,000 to file. But that's how you get your name on the ballot is through us, and then someone in our office actually signs. Or you could do that at the county level as well if you don't want to come to Topeka. You can just do it at your county seat, and they will send the check in the form up to us. But sometimes if it's getting close to the filing deadline, it's easier just to come into our office, or else we're not going to get it on time.
I'm going to change subjects just a bit. Is there a national organization of secretaries of state that you all get together and I guess share war stories?
War stories and great ideas.
There you go.
There is. It's the National Association of Secretaries of State. We're the oldest association for governmental officials in the nation. We're going to be 125 years old next year, I believe, or 100 years. I can't remember. I wasn't around when it was founded. But I'm actually going to be president, sworn in this July, and I'll be the fifth president of the association. Shanahan had been, Jack Breyer had been, Bill Graves had been, and Ron Thornburg as well, and then I'll be number 5. So it's quite the honor that your peers would choose you to take your lead spot. But we do collaborate, and sometimes we do kind of get in the room and we duke it out a little bit because the worldview of California is not going to be the same as the worldview of Kansas. And they get mad at the way we do things, and I remind them, well, I'm not doing it to California. We're doing this in Kansas. Kansas likes voter ID. Even our minority communities, by and large, and we visit with them, once we discuss what voter ID is, they embrace it because they don't want anybody voting in their stead. In other states, voter ID is the most offensive thing you could do, but we can have those conversations as to why. But we also get other great ideas, and sometimes we're the ones who supply the ideas. When Georgia had their issues in 2020 and a lot of arguments over signature matching, they asked us, how do you do voter ID for advanced mail ballot? How do you do that? And we just explained to 99% of the folks just put down their driver's license. That's how you do it. Once you have a driver's license number, it's easy to verify that voter. And, you can steal a Social Security number or a credit card, but most people They don't steal your driver's license number. I don't even know what my driver's license number is. But that's what it takes to verify that you're actually the voter that's casting that ballot. And other states are looking to Kansas now because that's a more secure way to verify the ballot than it is just matching a signature.
So as you look at, to be honest, I'd forgotten about voter ID. Is it a thing that is going to be here forever, or will it just be forever in Kansas? When you get to those different states, do they even care what Kansas thinks?
It just depends. If they have a problem, we have a solution. They absolutely do. And if we have a problem, they have a solution. We talk to them. And so, yeah, they really do. And many states are looking towards voter ID. Colorado is not, they're a little bit more progressive, you could say, but they're a voter ID state. And several states are realizing it's a lot safer because, for example, New Mexico is a very blue state, but they have some red counties. Well, the Democrats in that state are afraid that these conservative county commissions are going to throw out ballots because the signatures just don't match good enough. And they're very big advocates of making sure every ballot's counted. Err on the side of counting the ballot, don't err on the side of the integrity of the election. That's what they do. But they are looking at voter ID simply because they don't want these ballots thrown out because the county commission decided they didn't think the signature matched, but rather, hey, the ID is the ID. It's a black and white. Either it's the driver's license number and that driver, that ID, or it's not. It's not subjective like signature matching can be. So voter ID is slowly spreading even into more of your blue states.
So I want to change subjects once again. There was legislation passed this year in Kansas, the new election modernization bill. And will you explain that just a bit? And I suspect that mainly has to do with your office.
Yeah. So I've worked on passing several bills over the last 20 years of being in Kansas policy and politics. But this one I'm probably the most proud of, and a lot of it goes to the team in our office and legislators that absolutely helped us. There's so many things in statute that are just outdated. One of the best ones that I thought was hilarious goes back to 1865, maybe it was 1863. They passed a law that said if you show up to vote and there's no poll workers, you can elect your own poll workers. Well, we don't want that. But the reason why they did that in the 1800s was because Missouri was coming into Kansas and kidnapping the poll workers because they were afraid we're going to elect anti-slavery Republicans to the U.S. Congress. So we just figured, okay, that's not a 2022 problem anymore. We don't even play Missouri in sports hardly ever anymore. So we got rid of that. Another thing that was an issue, if you remember in the treasurer's race in the primary, Karen Tyson was less than a percentage down against now Treasurer Steve Johnson. So she wanted several recounts in several counties, but you had to tell us which counties before the Board of Canvassers met. So you had to tell us Friday, the Board of Canvassers were going to meet on Monday. Well, over the weekend, when she told us the counties that she wanted counted, over the weekend, several counties started processing their advanced mail ballots that they've been sitting on because they were so busy doing in-person voting, they were catching up on backlog ballots. Well, her counties flipped. Well, now she wanted a recount in that county, but it was already too late. And she asked the question, we tried to fix this before, but it's a very legitimate question she asked. How do I know which counties I want counted if I have to tell you before they're counted because the Board of Canvassers have not met? Mm-hmm. So we fixed that law in us as well, so you can ask for that recount after the Board of Canvassers meet. And I think that just encourages more confidence in the system and fairness for those candidates that are in close elections. Another issue we had is when you do these bond issues, in school bond issues and city bond issues, you had to give 30 days notice that you were going to have this mail election. But according to UACAVA, federal law for soldiers to vote, you actually have to give 45 days. So our state statute wasn't in line with federal statute, so we fixed that. So many things in this bill were just cleaning up old statute that were just, I guess the analogy we've been using is we organized the pantry, got rid of the outdated goods, and put everything in a system so everything has its proper home. And it takes so much more pressure off those county clerks. One of the biggest ones is often there's write-ins. In 2021 in the mayor's race in Wichita, 60-some people wrote in Epstein didn't kill himself as mayor. Mm-hmm. Well, that county clerk has to count those votes. So what we changed is if you're going to do a write-in campaign, you sign an affidavit with the county clerk's office saying, no, I'm actually going to campaign for the seat on a write-in vote. That way they don't have to count, Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse also. It saves the county so much trouble.
You bring up a great point. Everybody thinks that's kind of funny, but it really does create a great deal of work on the poll workers' point and possible confusion.
It does. And if you put Mickey, and let's say you have a Mickey running for office, and you put Mickey Mouse, now that the Board of Canvassers are like, how do we err? Was it really Mickey Mouse or was it just habit? For example, I was born on July 9th in 1972. So a lot of times if it's July 9th, 2023, by habit I put 72 because I'm so used to putting my birthday. Well, when it is my birthday, it's 2023 now, I shouldn't put 72, but just writing it so many times. Well, if you write Mickey Mouse all the time and you go to vote for a person named Mickey, was it just inertia? How do you interpret that? And those are some of the subjectivity that we've removed by saying, hey, if Mickey didn't sign an affidavit, it doesn't matter.
Secretary of State Scott Schwab, I appreciate you very much being my guest today and helping me feel that in Kansas, our elections are just awfully good, and we're very lucky to have them.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. It's an honor to be here. Appreciate it. And folks can go to our website. It's sos.ks.gov. And I always tell folks, if it doesn't say .gov after it, it can come from us if you want to find more information. And also, you high school kids that want to be a poll worker, it looks great on college applications for scholarships and admissions. So you might want to consider it. This would be a great year to do it because it's a little bit more simple election, these locals, and we could always use the help and you get paid.
And that is Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab. This has been On the Front Porch. This is Kyle Bauer reporting.